In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, hello everyone, and welcome to the new episode of the Fact series in which we discuss international political matters every week. This is Foad Mahdavi, and with us from Southern California, we have Professor Alexander Azadgan. He is a senior editor with the United World International Analytical Center, a senior geopolitical analyst with Press TV, and a professor of international political economy. We are here to discuss the current critical status in the U.S. Thank you for joining us, Professor Azadgan, and good to be with you. Let's get started with the U.S. civil protests. As reported in the world media, the United States is experiencing dire conditions that have been symbolized by a civil protest in the United States. What is the root of these popular protests in your perspective? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, we all know, the latest incident with this gentleman, George Floyd, what the police did to him right in broad daylight, just killed him, 8 minutes and 47 seconds, if I'm correct. They put the police officer put his knee on his neck for almost 9 minutes, like I said, and he died in front of camera saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe," which has become the slogan of the protesters, not just across America, but this has spread around the world, especially in Europe. I want to focus on some symbolic things because I don't want to repeat something that has been repeated so many times through global media. What I want to point out to is the deep-root racism that exists in this administration that is not getting much coverage. You have to understand, your viewers have to understand that Donald Trump is the new face of racism in this country. A very dangerous figure, very divisive, pure arrogance, pride, ego, narcissism, hubris, and now he's taking it to a different notch. The fact that he had his rally, he kickstarted his rally, his presidential rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, if you recall, a few days ago. Now, most people don't understand what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma 99 years ago, in 1921. Actually, America was shaken by one of its deadliest acts of racial violence in 1921. Next year, we are going to commemorate this. President Trump decided to have the rally there. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, we had one of the most successful, affluent African-American communities all across the United States. They have their own businesses. One of the streets where a lot of African-American businesses were concentrated was even called the Black Wall Street. The white racist supremacist mob was so angry at this that finally they decided to attack black establishments. A lot of these folks lived in very fine housing. They burned down their homes, their businesses, their companies, their shops, to the point that they had to flee, they had to run for their lives. And this man or whoever is behind choosing these dates and these places obviously is hinting something to the ultra-right-wing racist white supremacists in this country. This is unforgettable and unforgivable. Now, you would think this could be one incident. Guess what? His next rally is going to be in August. It's going to be in August 27th, right? It's going to be in Jacksonville, Florida. What's so specific about this date and Jacksonville, Florida? August 27th is the anniversary of a brutal attack called the Axe Handle Attack Saturday. That's what it was called. Axe Handle Attack Saturday. According to Florida Historical Society, in 1962, 200 white residents chased black Americans through the streets of downtown Jacksonville with baseball bats and axe handles following a sitting. So again, Donald Trump, pick a date and a place where racial atrocities took place, and it's a coincidence twice now? Is that what you're telling me, Donald Trump? No, it's not a coincidence. Is it possible that Trump may not be smart enough to pick these dates and places? Somebody is in his campaign. So let me say it again for those who seem to be deaf. Black lives absolutely matter, because all lives matter. But we don't exactly see white people being murdered by police left and right in front of cameras. So we don't see that, do we? Because it doesn't happen on broad daylight. What? On broad daylight in front of cameras. This country has brutalized and victimized the black people for 400 years, since the Mayflower landed in Plymouth Rock around 400 years ago. How ironic that tomorrow we'll be celebrating the so-called Independence Day of this country at a time where millions of black people were enslaved. Pretty much all what we call our founding fathers were slave owners, except a few. John Adams, our second president, was not a slave owner. He was probably an in-closet abolitionist, but we know, as a matter of fact, that he was not a slave owner. And we're celebrating the Independence Day of America, but the bondage of millions of people who were brought here from Africa in what was an extremely lucrative business. I call it the triangle of death. These people were brought in from Africa to here, were put in these cotton fields, and the cotton fields went to Europe, particularly England, and the product, which was textile, was exported all over the world. A lot of it back to America again. And so here we are again, after so many of these brutal deaths that we've seen during the past several years in America. And I think the police is actually, they're just sending a message that if you rise up, this is what we do to you. And it's not just the black people, it's a message to everybody. If you actually analyze the people who are at these protests, the absolute majority of them are white people, white youth that are alienated, that are socioeconomically alienated. They look at their future, it looks grim. A big bulk of jobs have been exported to China, not just in the past few years, we're talking decades. The COVID-19 has unemployed a big bulk of students. Many classes have been canceled. A lot of classes have gone online. And a lot of these kids have lost their job during the past several months. And the COVID-19 situation is, in my opinion, directly interrelated to these protests. And if these protests continue, as certain groups like Antifa and others plan to continue them, perhaps even provoking the police, which I don't think is a wise thing to do. Antifa is a very controversial group. I'm not endorsing them by any stretch of imagination, but if they continue these protests and it gets close to the elections, because we only got 4 months left, really, when you think of it, then that would have an impact of the chance of Donald Trump being reelected. If you study our various polls, he's 14 points behind Joe Biden, and this is a very significant thing. I won't call a revolution successful until it culminates in the arrest of many political leaders who are guilty of deprivation of civil rights. Until then, it's only a skirmish, and it ends in jailings, austerity, crackdowns, and now, as of recently, an executive order by Trump, very controversial. We talked about it on global media, especially Press TV, which made the removal of some of these statues illegal. I told our audience on some of our global media that these statues should belong in museums. We shouldn't lionize some of these figures whatsoever. First of all, the time for statues is over. This is something that we did, in the 19th century. Literally putting people on pedestals, as the expression goes. And a lot of these characters were despicable. People like Andrew Jackson, one of our presidents, right? I believe he was our 8th president. A man, his treatment of the Indian American, our native indigenous people, was so atrocious that Adolf Hitler used that as an example in the way he treated the Jews. He's also on our currency. This is a criminal, right? A man named Albert Pike, his statue was recently brought down. He was a known Freemason and also a general in the Confederacy. I think this is one of the few countries, if not the only country, that puts traitors on pedestal, and by that I mean actual statues. It had statues of traitors, and by that I'm talking about generals who fought in the Confederate Army, an entity that wanted to destroy the United States, that wanted to destroy the Union, that rose up, that got its financing and its support from Britain, who was our enemy during the Revolutionary Wars. And we have a lot of these people's statues, except for Jefferson Davis, who was the president of the Confederacy. And we have these people's statues up. And I'm sick and tired of people in the South saying this is our heritage. How would the Jews feel in Germany if we put statues of German generals from World War II? That would be absolute moral outrage. You cannot say, the Germans cannot come and say, oh, this is part of our heritage. I'm sick and tired of these people down in the South saying this is part of our heritage. Same thing with the Confederate flag. A lot of states, as you're aware, had the Confederate flag as part of their flag, within the emblem, within the design of the flag. Some of them just took it out, and some of them still have it, unfortunately. But it has to go through the legal process, in my opinion. I don't believe in mobs bringing down statues. I believe it has to go through the legal process, and the legal process in many cases has been successful. So we have to go through these procedures. I don't believe in mob mentality. I think you guys in Iran know quite well when the mobs are unleashed in the streets of Iranian cities and are supported by enemies of Iran. I think the same thing applies to United States. We got to go through the legal process, and we have men and women of honor within the apparatus, within various systems, governmental system, judicial system in the United States, who are very passionate about these issues, and it has produced positive results in the past. Now, let me just say something philosophical before I let you ask another question from me. The United States is a dictatorship of billionaires. That has always been the case. When this country was founded, a lot of our founding fathers were millionaires, if you may, at that time. Very affluent people. And now it has continued to be a dictatorship of billionaires, period. The so-called American dream is nothing but the exploitation of those who themselves don't know they are being exploited. And I'm talking about immigrants that are doing the bulk of the work and are being constantly demonized before this man got into office. And I'm talking about Donald Trump. As far as the rest of all that nonsense about the land of the free and home of the brave, all I have to do is quote the German philosopher Goethe, who said something very interesting. He said, none are so hopelessly enslaved as those who falsely believe they are free. And America, just to in brief, is one giant corporate kleptocracy, I'm afraid.
You know, the reaction of the American political system to the civil protest has led to the claim of American democracy in critical situations to be judged by different societies. What is your assessment of this hostile reaction of the U.S. government?
Yeah, well, you know, one of the worst parts of the Trump era is the inescapable realization of just how many truly awful people walk among us. This is very, very important for us to talk about because they're coming out in these rallies. It is truly disgusting, Floyd, that congressional Republicans, you talk about democracy, right? It doesn't get more democratic than our Congress, supposedly the representative of people, which they are not. They're representative of lobbies and special interest groups. But it is truly disgusting to me that our congressional Republicans, and I'm a Republican myself, I'm a conservative, it's truly disgusting that congressional Republicans have decided there's no higher cause than Trump. Criminals, racists, and rapists aren't coming from Mexico, unlike what Trump said. They're sitting in the White House, the Senate, and the Supreme Leader. Malcolm X, may he rest in peace, he said something very interesting that the video is actually on YouTube. I just quote him. He said, I, for one, as a Muslim, believe that the white man is intelligent enough. If he were made to realize how black people really feel, how fed up we are with the compromise and sweet talk, tell him how you feel. He was telling the black people, tell him how you feel. Let him know that if he's not ready to clean up his house, he shouldn't have a house, and that it should catch fire and burn down. These are the words of Malcolm X. Now, this is exactly what the Black Lives Matter movement has been saying, and God bless them for that. A lot of people who are, in deep sleep try to demonize the Black Lives movement. They are taking their lines from Malcolm X, who was talking the talk, 50 years ago. He was way ahead of Martin Luther King Jr., way ahead of him. Martin Luther King Jr. actually, toward the end of his career, before he was assassinated by FBI, was emanating. He was saying a lot of things that Malcolm X was saying. So, it's not just the statues of Andrew Jackson. It's not just our democracy that you were mentioning. It's just the whole thing is coming apart. I don't believe that America itself is coming apart. This is the strongest country in the world. It's not going to come apart, but people are they're reviewing our history again from a critical perspective, from an objective point of view. They're questioning the brainwashing that took place in K through 12. By the time they get to college, we tell them the truth, and a lot of them wake up. But here in my home state of California, for example, people were taking down the statues of a Catholic priest called Junipero Serra. This is the man who's responsible for building these missions, what we call the missions, these churches that are from San Diego all the way to Northern California. And the Catholic Church actually canonized him as a saint. Now here's a person that, enslaved thousands, hundreds of thousands of indigenous Native Americans, Indians, to build these missions, to build these roads. And we had statues, built for him, and they took him down. It had to come down. It must come down. We cannot idealize people who brutalize others, and it's time for us to question our bloody past. Every country, every civilization has a bloody past, and everybody's questioning that around the world. Malcolm Nance, an intelligence officer, he said something really interesting not too long ago. He said, my skin color gets me treated like I'm a threat. He also said that today racism has a national leader in America. We need to talk about this. We need to talk about the fact that Donald Trump is not just the arch enemy of the world. Donald Trump is the arch enemy of America. The two things that I cited for you, the Tulsa, Oklahoma rally, and the rally that's supposed to happen August 27 in Jacksonville, Florida. I mean, these dates are based on racial atrocities that took place. Am I supposed to sit here and believe that he doesn't know anything about it? People say, we had an incident in Charlottesville, if you remember, a couple of years ago, where a coward drove his car into protesters. And by the way, this is how Trump supporters usually express their dissent. They're cowards. They come at you in cars. They don't face you like a man. They come at you in a death metal machine, or they come at you from behind. We had a protest 3 weeks ago in Newport Beach, close to where I live, and there was some lunatic from Arizona who drove his car from behind the protesters. It was a miracle nobody was killed. But in Charlottesville, he drove his car into the people. This is how they do it. They're cowards. They're not manly enough to face you face to face and talk to you or protest in that way. So, if you have the right to tell the truth in America today, you have the duty to tell the truth. So it's going to come down to that. And there's nothing you can do about it. And when it comes to the black man in America, we have to say this. When it comes to the black man in America, the criminal justice, you talk about democracy, right? Let's talk about the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system itself has degenerated into being criminal itself. Right? When Donald Trump gets in front of cameras, when he holds that Bible in front of that church, which has been a sacred ground, James Madison, every president since James Madison has prayed in that church. He gets up there, he holds that Bible, which he doesn't believe in. This man is no Christian. I don't care how many evangelical Zionist Christians pray for him. This man is no Christian. Last time I checked, a Christian doesn't get out with Russian hookers urinating on him. This man is vile. He's no Christian. He is as disgusting and despicable as it comes. When he gets up there and he orders the National Guard and the police to use tear gas so he could have a photo opportunity to get up there and hold the Bible, I just like to tell him that this country was founded on protest. It's called the American Revolution. And, as far as all those people, the writers and what have you, they mess it up. The message of injustice in the U.S. got drowned. We saw the looting that took place in Los Angeles and Santa Monica. We all saw what happened. The message of injustice in the U.S. got drowned by lawlessness, by looting, and by arson, which is exactly what the system wanted. It comes down to this. There's a time when silence is betrayal. And finally, we had people who broke their silence, people like General Mathis, the former Secretary of Defense, in my opinion, an honorable man. This is a man who got up in front of Congress in a congressional hearing and told the congressmen and congresswomen that we gave our word to Iran. We cannot dishonor, we cannot back out of JCPOA. We had people like Admiral Mullen who stood up and said what Trump did with the tear gas and that photo op was disgusting. We had another Republican, Colin Powell, who got up. So these people realized that silence is betrayal. And these are, establishment Republicans who said that. Mm-hmm. It comes down to this. Either the United States will destroy itself with ignorance, or ignorance will... Either the United States will wake up and will destroy ignorance, which is what's happening right now. This is the good thing with the kids out in the street. Or ignorance will destroy the United States. That's it. We need a media in this country that covers power, not covers for power. This is what Fox News is doing. We need a media that is the fourth state and not for the state. This says if you watch Fox News, which is pro-Trump, it is an absolute atrocity. They make Black Lives Matter look like a terrorist organization, and that's an absolute moral outrage.
Right. Racism is one of the significant issues that seems is tied to American history. What do you think is the origin of this sort of behavior on behalf of the U.S. administration?
Well, we can talk about this administration. We can go back to the first administration of George Washington.
The origin of this? What do you think about the origin of this sort of behavior?
The origin of this sort of behavior goes back to our very first president, George Washington, as honest of a man that we are told he was, right? He was a slave owner. Thomas Jefferson, the man who put together the Declaration of Independence, a sacred document. As a writer, every writer who reads that, it is one of the most articulate pieces of writing for a declaration of human rights and independency and freedom and liberty. He himself was not only a slave owner, but he impregnated one of his slaves. And this is very academically documented. Now, we don't know if she was raped or not, but the process of having children through your slaves in many instances was not exactly voluntary. Like I said, between George Washington, who was our first president, and Thomas Jefferson, who was our third president, we had John Adams, who was our second president, who was very much against slavery. He was an honorable man. And for those of you who want to immerse yourself in a document, in a drama series in cinema, there is a very excellent drama series made by Steven Spielberg called John Adams. I believe it's one season. It has like 7 or 8 parts that documents the life and the beliefs and the principles of John Adams. It's really worth watching. But even Abraham Lincoln himself, here's a man who put together this document, Emancipation Proclamation. We went into war with the South, and the slavery was one of the issues. Most people think it was the only issue was over slavery. It wasn't. It was one of the issues. The biggest issue was the fact that the South wanted to separate from the Union. If you actually read some of Abraham Lincoln's writings, there were quite a lot of racist statements made by Abraham Lincoln. But one of the things that your audience needs to keep in mind is that judging the past, this is very, very important, Floyd, judging the past, especially the leaders in the past, based on today's norms, values, beliefs, and standards is problematic in itself from so many angles. Having said that, some of these statues, like I said, must be brought down because we are at a different level. Let me give you an example that many people in your generation would easily understand. Can we go back and judge Windows 95 operating system based on what we can do with Windows 10? Not really, because at that time the knowledge was limited to what Windows 95 could do. Now, were different operating systems available at that time that were much better and much more ahead of Windows 95? Yes. Same thing with principles and ideologies. Were men and women around, even at the time of our revolution, at the time of the founding of this country, who were against slavery, who were abolitionists, who were way ahead of their time? Yes. But it took a collective consciousness for the tide to turn. And then once the balance, right, once there was a change in the balance in consciousness, we had the masses, rising up and asking for change. So we have to very much keep that in mind. Every society has had a dark history. In Iran, for example, there were many slaves who were brought in from Africa in the southern parts of Iran by the Portuguese. The Portuguese brought a lot of slaves to the south part of Iran, and today there is African Iranians who speak Persian without an accent. This was a legacy, for the lack of a better term, of the Portuguese, who were huge. The Portuguese and the Spanish were a huge part of the slave trade in the United States. At that time, believe it or not, Britain was very much ahead of its time. They were very much anti-slavery. Again, another great movie by Steven Spielberg with Anthony Hopkins playing a lead role documents that. And the gentleman, the president, we talk about John Adams, the role that Anthony Hopkins plays is John Quincy Adams, who was the son of John Adams, who became a president himself. The name of the movie is not in my mind right now. Perhaps it'll come to me. But in that movie, they document the fact that British warships actually sunk Spanish slave ships. Now, mind you, the British were involved in the opium trade through the British East India Company, and the atrocities that the British did in China was beyond anything that anybody else has ever done. So that needs to be noted. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for joining us again, and I do appreciate you to your noteworthy remarks, and I hope things are going well with you, Professor Azadgan. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thank you for having me, Floyd.
Dear audience, it was another talk with Professor Alexander Azadgan, a senior editor with United World International Analytical Center and a senior geopolitical analyst with Press TV and a professor of international political economy and the current critical status in the US. Thanks for watching and catch you later.